When we talk about friendship, last week we kind of started with a friendship between kind of an odd couple. It's a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law, Ruth and Naomi. And just watching how God intends to use these relationships to actually bring redemption to each other's lives. And not just to their physical lives, but to their legacy, and how years later we're still talking about them because they are the women that are in the lineage of Jesus. And so today we're kind of shifting gears and kind of flipping it over to some guys. And there's some specific challenges, I think, when it comes to guys and friendships and spiritual relationships. Because I think that my opinion, and it's up for review, but my opinion is this. I feel like guys they can break the ice a little bit easier than women tend to do. And it means that, because we just gather around stupid stuff. And that just, it's sports or it's whatever. And it's easy to just, okay, we're here. You look beside you and, okay, well, we're all here. And then we got something to talk about. But we have a much more difficult time going any further than that. So I think guys tend to get in the mode where we might have a lot of people that we call friends, and they're really just good acquaintances because we gather around familiar things. But when it comes to matters of the heart, when it comes to faithfulness, when it comes to spiritual journey together, none of that makes any sense to us. And we don't dive there very quickly. This is a story of two guys. When you talk about friendship, from the female side, it's Ruth and Naomi. In the scriptures, the relationship that kind of rises above all others, as far as friendship goes, is this relationship with two guys, David and Jonathan. And it's kind of an odd couple connection, because here's the situation. At this point, what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to give you three little snapshots of this friendship. And there's 50 snapshots that you could pick from. But I'm just going to kind of just give you three little things, and so I kind of got to set up each one. But here's the context of the whole relationship, all right? This is the moment where Saul is the first king of Israel. Jonathan is Saul's son. So he's the prince of Israel, if you will. Okay, he's next in line to be king. And then this shepherd boy, David, gets anointed next king while Saul is still alive, because Saul's disobeyed God. He's gone his own way in his own pride. And God has selected, through the prophet Samuel, selected a new king to replace Saul. So David's like king in waiting. And that's real challenging, because Jonathan's supposed to be, politically and socially, he's the king in waiting. So it's kind of an odd friendship to form here. And David, he kind of comes out of nowhere. And this first snapshot that I want to give to you is the scenario where you've probably heard David mentioned more than any other, and it's David and Goliath. And David's this shepherd boy, and he's a pizza delivery guy for his brothers. He's bringing them lunch. That's all he's good for. He's the youngest, the no count, and he's delivering lunch to the battlefield of his brothers. And he's like shocked that the entire army is petrified, and he looks out and he sees this giant, and he just, and he's just dissing the whole country, abusing their faith in God, and just making fun of the whole nation, daring anyone to challenge him, daring anyone to come out. And David's kind of had enough of hearing that. And some of you know the story. He takes it, he kills the giant. And listen, overnight, not even overnight, in the matter of a few hours, this boy, David, he goes from nobody, just good enough to deliver lunch to his real warrior brothers on the front line. That's all he's good for. He goes overnight from that to the celebrated next king, if you will. And everything that Saul the king promised to anybody who would defeat the giant, he gave to David. Here's my daughter. You can have her in marriage. Here's, gold, and here's riches, and here's prominence, and all this stuff, okay? So that just happened. And so Saul has just given David all this, and this is where we pick up the story. Now, it came about when he had finished speaking to Saul. So right after he'd spoken to Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. And Jonathan loved him as himself. And Saul took David that day, and did not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, with his armor, including his sword and his bow and his belt. And here's a picture of what a friendship looks like, how a friendship can possibly start. It's in the most unlikely of circumstances that there's this act that begins a friendship. Listen, every friendship starts somewhere. And honestly, when you break the ice in a friendship, it requires a little bit more boldness. It requires a little more, courage on your part. But a lot of times it requires a little bit more than that. For Jonathan, it required an amazing step of humility. Because here's the moment in time where if Jonathan was going to be jealous, if he was going to be a jealous guy, this is it. It would be very, very easy for him to look at David and listen to his dad, the king, give him all the praise and the glory for which is what is due him. But for Jonathan to think, hey, this should be me. And that kind of brings up a thought, because a couple of things you got to remember about Jonathan is, one, he is next in line to be the king. But number two, we understand, from other stories, that Jonathan's a pretty good warrior himself. I mean, there's a story a few chapters before this in 1 Samuel chapter 14 where Jonathan is kind of frustrated with the enemy, and he's kind of tired with the politics of inactivity on their army's part, and he basically says, hey, I'm going to take matters into my own hands. And he knows that there's an encampment of an enemy garrison that's kind of up on the cliff, and they're kind of in this protected space, so they feel very safe of where they're at. And Jonathan's like, hey, I'm going to do a surprise attack. And basically all he takes with him is his armor bearer. The only person he takes with him. And they scale, hands and feet, they scale the cliffs. And they surprise attack this garrison in such a way that, and when you read the story, the enemy feels like, wow, God is literally growing people out of the ground to come after us. That's essentially what the story goes out. And it kind of completely freaks out the entire Philistine army, and they flee because they see just Jonathan and an armor bearer come out of an impossible situation, scale this cliff, and they attack this group of 20 men. And it creates such fear and confusion that the whole army scatters. And that's the kind of guy that Jonathan is. He's not a wimp. He's not a privileged prince that just kind of stands back and just enjoys his privileged status. And so it kind of brings me to the question, so what happened between, chapter 14, and then you got Goliath coming on the scene? I mean, what happened to Jonathan? Because honestly, you would think the character of Jonathan, the fight that's in Jonathan, that he would have been the one to go out to Goliath. And we'd be talking about Jonathan and Goliath for centuries. It just doesn't have the same ring, does it? Why didn't he do that? And we don't really know, but here's the thing, when he scaled the cliff and, sent the whole army, his dad, the king, saw, he basically barely recognized it. In fact, he accused him of a couple things. And I feel like Jonathan at this point had just lost heart. He's been discouraged. He's gotten to the point where he's never thanked. He maybe has lost confidence in himself. Maybe he's lost confidence in God. But for whatever reason, he is not that bold, fierce person. that understands and believes God. See, because this is what he says when he's attacking this garrison. Listen to this. It's not on screen, but I love this verse. Because when he's going to attack it, this is the heart of Jonathan. He says to the man who was carrying his armor, "Come and let us cross over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. Perhaps the Lord will work for us. For the Lord is not restrained to save by many or by few." Hey, I know it's just 2 of us. But you know what? God's not limited. He doesn't need an army of 1,000. He's not restrained to help for a many or few. God doesn't say, hey, as long as you get your quota together, as long as you're strong enough, then I'll kick in a little bit here. Jonathan's got this faith that says, God's going to be for us. And so what happens that he's not that person out there fighting? And he's got a faith down in there in God's ability to work and God's ability to use him. But it's faded. And the reality is that's what happens to all of us at some point or another. I mean, we might go through some spurts where, we've got it together and our faith in God and our confidence in ourselves and what His plan for, like we're tracking. But guys, very few people, in fact, nobody that's really honest with themselves walks through life consistently that way forever. No matter how strong you are, if you're honest with yourself, you got a little fear that kicks in. You got a lot of lack of confidence. You missed out on that promotion that you thought you would get. You didn't get the grade that you thought you should have had. You missed out on some opportunity, and there's a failure there. You didn't make the team. And you're like, I thought I was good enough. And then you feel like sometimes there's some promises that God you've believed that haven't quite come true yet. And you start asking the questions like, is God care? Is He with us? Is He for us? And in those moments, what happens? Well, for David and Jonathan, what happens is they help each other lead the way. They essentially, cut a path for each other. And right here in this moment, I think, David, like Jonathan sees the boldness in David. He reminds Jonathan of his confidence in God, because Jonathan goes out and says, you're not going to defy my God. I'm going to take you down no matter how big the challenge. And I think Jonathan sees that, and there's something in Jonathan's heart that says, okay, that reminds me of myself. And it knits these 2 guys together. And it knits them to the point where Jonathan says, here's my robe. Here's my armor. He's essentially saying, David, I know that you're going to be the next king, and I'm going to honor you with love. And that should have been him. Guys, I think to be a good friend, you just got to be so for the other person that sometimes you got to put away some jealousy. Sometimes you got to put away viewing people as competition. And you got to start honoring and loving people. And on top of that, good friends, as this friendship unfolds, you can see that sometimes David's cutting the path out there. And it gets, Jonathan steps in and it pulls Jonathan along. But we're going to see here in a second in the third snapshot that the roles are reversed and Jonathan's carving the path because David's the one that's discouraged. And what it reminds me of is, some of you have been watching Olympics and, you've seen some of the cycling stuff, particularly the long distance, or maybe you're in the Tour de France, or maybe you just know this because you ride bikes. I don't, because they're really dangerous. At least that's my excuse, okay? And so, but this, or some of you are NASCAR fans, and it's drafting. It's really a weird dynamic to get a hold on. And I can only imagine what it's like, because when the guy in the lead is cutting through the wind, okay, cutting through air, there is that resistance. But because they're cutting through, those that are right behind them, there's literally a vacuum effect that pulls them closer. And literally that's exactly what you see happening here. David's cutting through the crap that's built up, and it pulls Jonathan along with him. And that's what friendships do. Like they set the pace for each other. And listen, a good, faithful friendship is not one person always setting the pace. A good spiritual friendship is when sometimes one person's charting the course and they need somebody else is needed to like get the vacuum effect and kind of get sucked along with their faith. Because in a week or two or in a year or two, circumstances are going to be different. And this person's going to be cutting through the resistance. Because the weakness or the humility just needs to get sucked up in there. So like that's the idea of this friendship. And if you'll dig in, if you'll read in 1 Samuel, you'll see this back and forth throughout their whole friendship. Guys, spiritual friends help each other find and follow God. And they set the pace for each other. And guys, we've all had days, we've all had seasons, we've all had tough parts in our lives where God is just kind of harder to find or harder to identify. We can't hear Him as well as we have in the past. And when we don't see Him work around us and we can't sense that like we've had before, sometimes we just need somebody to kind of say, hey, it's going to be all right. You can kind of just line up behind me and let's go. The second thing about this friendship is that they're just friendships, spiritual friends. They just stay faithful. As it sounds really simple, but we're in this midst of redefining friendship. And if there's one characteristic of friendship, it has to be there. It's faithfulness. It's faithfulness in the midst. Faithfulness is only exemplified. It's only shown example when the going gets tough. Faithfulness is not faithfulness when everything's great. Because that's just good friendship. Faithfulness is defined and put to the test in times of struggle and conflict. And when somebody's having a difficult time or difficult season, who's around them? The second snapshot happens, David and Jonathan, they've got a good friendship going, but here's the situation. Saul has become very jealous of David and all the praise that he's getting. And he hears that he's been anointed the next king, and he wants to execute him because he's a threat to his kingdom. And so Saul is coming, and he's saying, I'm after you, and David's on the run. He's running for his life, literally running for his life. And what he needs is he needs to know Saul's next move. And so he's about to ask Jonathan, can you let me know what's going on? Can you give me some insight? He's asking Jonathan to spy on his own father and give him the intel that he needs to be able to survive. And he knows how difficult this request is going to be, and he's trying to spit it out, if you will, at this point. And he's talking to Jonathan, and this is what Jonathan says, kind of interrupts David. He says, then Jonathan said to David, whatever you say, I'll do for you. It's a friend that you're like, oh, I don't know if I want to put you in this situation. I don't know if this is going to be too much to ask because it's going to redefine his relationship with his dad. And on top of that, it's very risky because if Jonathan's discovered, he's going to be dead. And Jonathan can sense David's tension there. And he says, hey, let me tell you something. Whatever it is, whatever you say, I just want you to know I'll do it for you. It's faithfulness. It's faithful friendship. And then it's expressed a few verses later because they're kind of wrestling through what this means. And this is really, honestly, the last conversation they actually have face to face with each other. And Jonathan expresses back to David almost like you would do the same for me. In fact, he says, look, if I am still alive, John says, if I'm still alive, will you not show me the loving kindness of the Lord that I might not die? It's a question that's asked with an understood answer of yes. Like, David, you'd do the same for me, wouldn't you? Of course you would. Like, I'm going to express to you this loyal, faithful love. In fact, he calls it the loving kindness of God. I'm going to be God-like. I'm going to imitate God and His love, and I'm going to like put that in flesh and blood, and I'm going to express it to you. I'm I'm going to show it to you right here. That word, loving kindness, it's the word hesed. It's H-E-S-E-D. It's just a Hebrew word, and it's a really important word. We didn't talk about it last week, but it's kind of littered all through that story of Ruth. It's loyal, faithful love no matter what. It's unconditional love. It's love that is not conditioned on a response. It's love that's not preconditioned on meeting a certain set of standards or agenda or your marks. It's just said, hey, it's love because that's what love is. And that's this word. And Jonathan's like, David, I know you would do this for me. I know you'd express real love, faithful love. And the reality of what happens from here is kind of crazy. But the answer is yes. And David does express it. Unfortunately, he doesn't get to express it to Jonathan because soon after this, Saul and Jonathan both are killed in battle. And David does something that is remarkable. It's just unheard of. Because listen, in that day and age, when you would succeed to the king, when you would bring, the first thing that you would do as king would be to kill all of the previous king's relatives, all of his sons, all of his grandsons, exterminate everybody. Why? Because they are the greatest threat to your position. And so as Saul and Jonathan both die and David ascends to king, what does the rest of Saul's family do? And David starts to hunt down one of Jonathan's relatives. And he's hiding in fear. But David finds him and protects him and supplies everything that's needed for him for the rest of his life. Because he's loyal and faithful to his friend, even after his friend's passed away. That's the kind of friendship. That's what friendship actually is. Like the funny thing that I have in teaching through this is we're talking about it like it's extravagant, like it's amazing. And guys, this is just like basic friendship. I don't know what it is, and maybe it's our culture and the mobility of it, but faithfulness through tough circumstances, it's just not honored that much. It's not even expected. It's such a shock when it happens. The standard is kind of, hey, we're friends for a season, and kind of the friendship works when it works for both of us. When it's comfortable for both of us, when we're surrounding a game or, it's our kids' team and we're there, but then the next season happens, or then the Panthers aren't as good, maybe. Hopefully, I think they'll be fine, all right? But like if you're a Panthers fan, like you've seen a few extra fans the last year, right? And you're wondering, like, okay, well, what, who's down? It's just that when it works, it's great. But then when tough times come, who's there? And unfortunately, I just feel like what a basic standard of faithful friend is just completely lost on us. I think it has to do with how busy we are, because really we don't have time for somebody else's struggle. We can barely handle our own and our own schedules. I think we can fill our space and our social space with pseudo friends, acquaintances, and we can kind of be connected to other people through social media that we didn't. And so we can just be at this level, never dive below the surface, never sit with somebody in their struggle, never actually express faithfulness that cost us something. And I just ask you, do you have a friend that has ever expressed to you that kind of faithfulness? Faithfulness that cost them something. And then the next question is, have you ever been that friend? Well, the third snapshot and the last snapshot is this. So Jonathan's back alive again in this snapshot, all right? But here's the situation. Saul is he's trying to kill David, and David's on the run because David's got a character that will not allow him to attack and kill Saul. because that's God's anointed king. And he's patiently waiting for God's plan to kind of come to life, to be revealed. But in his waiting, he is running. He's literally living in caves, literally struggling for resources, for food and basic necessities for he and the people that are with him. And I think David gets really frustrated. I think he gets really discouraged. He's like, all I've been is faithful. I can imagine some of his prayers like, God, all I've done is what you told me to do. I mean, there's a giant out there. I killed it. Sure, I got honor for that, but you know what that put me? That made the king jealous at me. Look where that's got me. I've had my life threatened. I've been almost killed. And now I'm resolved to just slinking around in caves and just scratching the ground for resources. And I feel like David's kind of like, like, really? Like, if this is what it means to follow God, thanks, but no thanks. And that's where we pick up the story. 1 Samuel 24. One day, near Horesh, David received news that Saul was on the way to Ziph to search for him and kill him. He's like, here he comes. Here he comes. And this is what happens. Jonathan went to find David and encouraged him to stay strong in his faith in God. And he said, David, don't be afraid. Jonathan reassured him, my father will never find you. You are going to be the king of Israel, and I'll be next to you, as my father Saul is well aware. So the two of them renewed their solemn pact before the Lord. Listen, here's the thing that Jonathan does. 3 things right here. First, he shows up. He goes to him. He shows up. The second thing is he literally speaks faith to him. He says, hey, don't be afraid. I'm going to remind you of I'm going to speak faith to you. And then he reminds David of God's promises. You're going to be the next king. God has said so. It's almost like David, like it's the pep talk. Now it's David that needs it. And Jonathan's kind of cutting through. Here's my challenge for you. It's those 3 things. For people around you this week. Number 1, show up. Show up. I want to end a phrase forever, okay? Because here's a phrase that you and I both use, and I'm guilty, and I've been convicted of it, and so I'm going to share conviction with you. Here we go, all right? Because we'll hear of somebody that's in a difficult situation. They've faced a really terrible sickness. There's a death in the family. There's a tragedy. There's some circumstance. They've lost their job. Whatever, okay? Chaos has broken out. And we'll call or we'll send a text, and this is what we'll say. Ultimately, blah, blah, blah. Hey, if... You want to finish it for me? If you need anything or if there's anything I can do, then what? Let me know. Let me tell you what that does. That is a tap out. It's a tap out, cop out. It alleviates you. You, not them, because the burden's still on them. I mean, what do we think people in chaos need? They need to figure out they don't even know what they need. That's what friends do. They figure it out for them. They don't say, hey, when you get your act together and you're thinking straight enough to make a plan, let me know where I fit in that plan. And I'll do it. It's a cop-out. It basically says, hey, I know I'm supposed to be your friend, but I'm not really going to be your friend. But later when you ask me about it, I'm going to be able to say, well, I told you if you need anything, I'd help you. It's really just a load of crap. I hate to put it that way. But that's what that statement is. It's pseudo friendship. It's fake. It's what we call friendship. But it's not friendship. Friends show up at the hospital. They show up when the news comes. They break through. I don't know what I'm going to say. You don't have to say anything. That's the enemy telling you, well, why are you going to show up? You don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. You just need to be there, though. They show up unannounced. They don't wait for the invitation. Well, if you let me know, just give me a call. I'll be there. No. They show up. The second thing they do is they speak faith. Guys, you got to have the boldness to speak some faith. Because, guys, we all need it. I need it. I need some people to speak faith to me sometimes. I get really discouraged and weak, if you will. And when I get weak, I get really petty. I get really gripey. Just ask my kids. Like, don't mess with Dad. Somebody needs to speak faith to him. And I start not believing things that I should believe. Look, God's got a plan. He's working it out. I'm going to trust it. I'm going to wait on his work. Waiting's hard, but it's easier with good friends that are speaking faith. And then Jonathan reminds him of God's promise. We don't have to create it. God's promise to send a comforter. Hey, the Spirit's going to be a comforter. Hey, you're never, ever alone. I'm here and God is here. It's just reminding of simple truths, simple promises. That's friendship. That's what God wants from us. And guys, listen, if it can't form in the context of a church, then it's not going to form somewhere else. Loyal, faithful love is a mark of our God. And it gets expressed as we imitate him as the model and example. And at great sacrifice, Jesus died for us before we moved towards him, while we were still heading our own way. Before we even knew what friendship with God was like, God paved the path at great cost. That's the model. And that's our marching orders. And if we can't imitate that, what can we imitate? If it's not going to be found in the church, where are you going to find it? Because there's no other religious leader that has died for his followers and rose again and defeated death and offered them free connection with God forever. So it's up to us. We've got great opportunities. Guys, high schoolers, there's tons of families moving here. A lot of them have high schoolers. I have no idea what it'd been like to move when I'm a freshman or a sophomore or a junior. And you step away basically from who you are or were into who knows what. And so guys, just get out of your packs and just expand them a little bit. Somebody speak faith to your friends and say, hey, you know what? Let's be this to this person. They're not hard to find if you just open your eyes. And it won't be hard to be loved at lunchtime or whatever, bull time. Y'all still have bull time? Good. Don't lose it like you did last year. I'm just kidding. It's just like, man, those are bull time. That is like, oh, crap time. For what? I mean, I've got my schedule, so I got to be in this class, be in this. But now I got bull time. What am I going to do in bull time? What am I going to do in lunchtime? Who am I going to sit with? This is real, all right? And if you can just be that. Just be that person. Lead a couple of your friends to be the same thing. It's a life changer. It's a game changer. You might meet your best friend by doing that. So do it. Parents, when I talk to high schoolers, you're like, you guys should do that. Yeah. Don't be stupid. Everybody knows what it's like to walk in a lunchroom and not know anybody. Come on, you should do that, But you won't even grab a pizza box. And knock on your neighbor's door who just moved in and doesn't know anybody. Come on. Let's do it. Let's do it. It's simple love. It's baby steps. It's going to lead us to some big steps later on where faithful love is required. It's going to cost us a lot. But right now, let's just get on a little training program. All right? Thousands of people are moving here. The world's moving to us. Church, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I'm done with my message, but I want to say this one comment. Because I've driven around town recently, and there's a couple of churches that happen to be doing movies. And I thought, what do I think about that? Like, we do movies in the park. And some of you have asked me, and they're kind of like, well, yeah, the church is doing movies. Listen, I am so glad that we have got churches that are trying, okay? We're on the same team here. Yeah, thank you, okay? If you know people who are going to those churches, you ask them, hey, how did that thing go? So excited to see you do that. So glad that we can join with other churches to reach out. Let me tell you what happens to a church that's like you guys, that leads the way. Other churches start getting on board. And I don't, right now, they're just kind of maybe doing what they know to do, or they do what other people do. Do you realize that that's why we have barbecues in the fall at every church around? Because one church did it down in Mallard Creek, right? That's the big poo-pah. I didn't realize this. But that's like, thousands and thousands and thousands of people just show up there, and all the politicians come and all that stuff. And so now everybody does a barbecue. Every church, every Presbyterian church does a barbecue because they did it. Works for them. Look, that's fine. That's a baby step. But as they do this, God will lead them to find their own way in their own situation. And maybe it does work for them to do that, but maybe God gives them another idea. But they're after it, and they're trying. And what we should be saying is, way to go. Way to go. Because it takes us all. I'm in traffic study reports right now about our new facility. And I just made a joke on Tuesday night at the planning board meeting. I said, well, unfortunately, traffic's not a problem on Sunday mornings. Because nobody's worried about traffic on Sunday mornings. Why? Because nobody goes to church, folks. It's about 15% of this community that goes to a church. Don't kid yourself. Yeah, we're in the South. Yeah, we're in the Bible Belt. Nobody goes to church here either. Okay? It takes a whole host of churches to reach out to a whole host of people. And we can't get it done by ourselves. But I'm glad we're leading the way. And I'm glad that other people are in the game with us. So let's encourage them. Let's love them. Let's ask them how it went. Let's try to figure out if we can help them in any way. And if not, we just give them a high five and keep on going. All right? Thanks. Let me pray for us. God, thanks for your church, big church, not just little church like this, your church worldwide, your church in our city, your church in our community. Thank you, God, for giving people an idea and the passion to reach out to people around them. It's going to take us all. I pray, Father, that you would help us to be a force of friendship, of redefining friendship with flesh and blood, not just the ideas, God, but that we would show up and that we would be loyal and that we would ask and break through the question, the silence and the questions that people have and the struggles that they have, so that we can speak faith into their hearts and their lives and remind them of your promises and your plans that you have for us and for them. Thanks for giving us friends that help us to go further together. We love you and pray in Jesus' name. Amen.